It's my contention that the Rolling Stones and the Beatles were twin pillar acts of a Tavistock social engineering project, and whose evolution was crafted to take them from teeny bopper pop sensations to the central figures and influences of a global counterculture operation. The primary motive of this endeavour was steering the large boomer demographic away from Christianity, traditional family structure and the moral order of a European society, and towards atomisation, hedonism, degeneracy and ultimately nihilism. Running parallel to this was a more esoteric motive of bringing the culture towards the Age of Aquarius, an astrological concept central to Aleister Crowley's Luciferian inverted commas religion of Thelema. In order to achieve this change, they had to facilitate the end of the Age of Pisces, a period of humanity in which religion, or organised religion, played a key role. The last 60 years has seen this push exponentially increase. This is not just some social policy dreamed up by pragmatically minded civil servants. This is the elite's application of Thelema, an explicitly Luciferian belief structure which has been the dominant social force in Western global politics, entertainment, media and culture for the last century. The Beatles and Stones' part in this, I believe, was a premeditated operation, and both acts, or at least key members within them, would have been on Tavistock's radar prior to their musical formation. In attempting to back this supposition up, I believe the events of 1967 can, if not conclusively prove the matter, then at least lend it some serious credibility. In February of 1967, acting on a tip-off alleged to have been from the News of the World, police raided a party at Keith Richards' Sussex country pile, Redlands, seizing cannabis and amphetamine. Of the musicians, artists and socialites that were present, the police charged Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Anita Pallenberg, Marianne Faithfull and the purported Acid King himself, David Schneiderman, with drug offences. Let's take a further look at those guests and their connections. Quote, David Schneiderman, under the alias David Jones, also known as the Acid King, usually carried a briefcase which acted as a mobile drug dispensary. Robert Fraser was an art dealer nicknamed Groovy Bob by Terry Southern on account of the gatherings he organised, which included celebrities such as the Beatles, the Stones, photographer Michael Cooper, designer Christopher Gibbs, Marianne Faithfull, Dennis Hopper, William Burroughs and Kenneth Anger. End quote. Anger, nee Kenneth Angelmeyer, was an American filmmaker, occultist and Aleister Crowley obsessive. He was an associate and close collaborator with the founder of the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey. He was also a homosexual and, like his hero Crowley, purported to be a paedophile. He formally converted to Thelema, Crowley's so-called religion, and was something of an ever-present in the inner circles of 60s countercultures, movers and shakers. He later became a close friend with fellow Crowley obsessive and the man who would go on to buy Crowley's home on the shores of Loch Ness, as well as, causing much consternation with Anger, outbidding anyone for rare Crowley books and manuscripts, Jimmy Page. Page, who, like his hero Crowley and his pal Anger, also shared a predilection for performing sexual acts on the underage. Robert Groovy Bob Fraser, the son of top banker Sir Lionel Fraser. Sir Lionel was a Christian Scientist who rose from humble backgrounds to upper echelons of British society. I cannot pretend to know a great deal about such a denomination, but a quick read-up on them reveals what could be called New Age traits, and many sources claim there is a strong link to Freemasonry. It is also very well represented in Hollywood. Some key members of the Christian Scientist Church were Ginger Rogers, Mickey Rooney, Marilyn Monroe, Robin Williams, Henry Fonda, Ellen DeGeneres, Audrey Hepburn, and Metallica guitarist James Hetfield. His son, Robert Fraser, attended Eton and served for several years in the King's Africa Rifles. Upon his return to England, and with the financial assistance of his father Sir Lionel, a trustee of the Tate Gallery, he established the Robert Fraser Gallery in Grosvenor Square, London, 1962. Quote, the Robert Fraser Gallery became a focal point for modern art in Britain, and through his exhibitions he helped to launch and promote the work of many important new British and American artists, including Peter Blake, Jan Hayworth, Richard Hamilton, Gilbert and George, Andy Warhol, Harold Cohen, and many more. End quote. Fraser played a key role in conceptualizing the infamous, highly occulted and Masonic album sleeve for Sgt. Pepper's. He advised the band on the original idea, came up with having the historical figures, and introduced them to Peter Blake, latterly Sir Peter, and the strident feminist artist Jana Hayworth, who would carry out the artwork. He had a similar influence on the Rolling Stones' 1967 psychedelic lifestyle-promoting album Their Satanic Majesty's Request, again contributing to the visual concept of the artwork. He introduced them to Michael Cooper, more later, who finished the design process and photography of the sleeve. He was later described by Paul McCartney, presumably Billy, as one of the most influential figures of the 1960s scene. Quote, Fraser left the UK and spent several years in India during the 1970s. He returned to London in the early 1980s and opened a second gallery in 1983. But by this time he was suffering from chronic drug and alcohol problems, and the gallery never replicated the success of its predecessor. Although Fraser was again influential in promoting the work of Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring. It soon transpired that Fraser was also suffering from AIDS. He was one of the first celebrity victims of the disease in the United Kingdom. End quote. So it's interesting to note that the artist he sponsored in the 1980s, this is Basquiat, a street artist who was famous for early graffiti and street art. His visual poetics, this is a quote, so quote, his visual poetics were acutely political and direct in their criticism of colonialism and support for class struggle, end quote. Here's some of his work, make your own mind up about the quality. And this is Haring, a homosexual who promoted LGBT themes and class war in his work. So it's not hard to draw parallels with Fraser's work in the 1960s wave of social engineering and the agenda's later evolution in the 1980s and beyond. It seems that in both decades his work fit like a glove to that of the Tavistockian agenda. I would conclude that when looking at figures such as Fraser, when taking their background and entire life works into account, that he was very likely what you might call a change agent, influential figures that work on behalf of the wider project. Now let's look at Michael Cooper, whom Fraser introduced to the Rolling Stones. He would go on to photograph Sgt. Pepper's artwork and designed and photographed the Stones' Satanic Majesty's Request, and was an acolyte and cameraman of the aforementioned Kenneth Anger. Some information on the Rolling Stones' Satanic Majesty's cover follows. Quote, one proposed cover, a photograph of Jagger naked on a cross, was scrapped by the record company for being in bad taste. The initial LP of the album featured a three-dimensional picture of the band on the cover by photographer Michael Cooper. When viewed in a certain way, the lenticular image shows the band's members' faces turning towards each other with the exception of Jagger, whose hand appears crossed in front of him. Looking closely on its cover, one can see the faces of each of the four Beatles. I mean, there you go. Reportedly, a response to the Beatles' inclusion of Shirley Temple doll wearing a Welcome the Rolling Stones sweater on the front cover of Sgt. Pepper. The jumper of the doll, the jumper that the doll is wearing was that of Cooper's son. End quote. So we can see the winking between the two bands appeared on both albums, both being overseen and conceptualized by the same cabal of occultist, almost certainly Masonic, artistic set. Almost as if both bands were under the same umbrella and part of the same project involving promoting mind-warping narcotics, socially revolutionary lifestyles, and occultist imagery in unison. Quote, the entire cover design is elaborate, with a dense photo collage filling most of the inside cover, along with a maze. Designed by Michael Cooper and a painting by Tony Mewison on the back cover depicting the four elements of earth, water, fire, and air. In some editions, the blue and white wisps on the front cover are used in a red and white version on the paper inner sleeve. The inner cover collage had dozens of images taken from reproductions of old master paintings, Ingres, Poussin, Da Vinci, amongst others, Indian mandalas and portraits, and astronomy, including a large image of the planet Saturn. I mean, they don't hide it, do they? Flowers, world maps, etc. The maze on the inside cover of the United Kingdom and US releases cannot be completed. A wall at about half radius in from the lower left corner means that one can never arrive at the goal labelled "It's here" in the centre of the maze. End quote. Quite clearly, the image is entirely keeping with the occultism that was being promoted by both bands, pillars of the same operation, if you prefer. During 1967, Cooper and Terry Southern, also present at the party, were collaborating on a project to film A Clockwork Orange, which Cooper intended to direct and cast Jagger in the role of Alex. The project was eventually shelved, and Southern passed on the book and idea to Stanley Kubrick. He took his own life, aged 31, in 1973. Also in attendance was antique dealer Christopher Gibbs, known as the King of Chelsea, another very interesting and influential character of exceptional aristocratic breeding, as we shall see. Quote, Christopher Henry Gibbs, 1938 to 2018, was a British antiques dealer and collector who was also an influential figure in men's fashion and interior design in 1960s London. He has been credited with inventing swinging London and has been called the King of Chelsea and London's most famous antique dealer. The New York Times described him as a man of infinite taste, judgment and experience, the one who introduced a whole generation to the distressed bohemian style of interior design. Like fellow guest Robert Fraser, Gibbs was an Etonian and the son of a knight of the realm. Quote, Gibbs was the fifth son of Honourable Sir Geoffrey Cockayne Gibbs, KCMG, and his wife Helen Margaret Leslie, CBE. CBE is Commander of the British Empire. KCMG it's another title. I can't think of it off the top of my head. And the grandson of Herbert Gibbs, the first Baron Hunsdon of Hunsdon. His elder brother is financier Sir Roger Gibbs. He was educated at Eton College, from which he was expelled for being generally totally impossible, Stanbridge Earls School in Hampshire, and the University of Poitiers. We can see his further influence on the counterculture here. A style leader in 1960s London, Gibbs is credited with fellow Old Etonian Robert Fraser with inventing swinging London. He has been said to be the first man to wear flared trousers in 1961 and was ordering flower print shirts by 1964. He was an editor of the shopping guide in the quarterly Men in Vogue, the first male edition of the magazine produced between 1965 and 1970, which was closely associated with the Peacock Revolution in English men's fashion in the 1960s. His style has been described as a kind of louche dandyism, while others have described him a latter-day Beau Brummel. So you can see this kind of 1960s style, the sort of dandy and the sort of peacock, it's not organic. And look at the source. Look at the source. At the same time, Gibbs was running his own antiques business, which he had started in 1958, making regular trips to Morocco to acquire stock. He brought back Moroccan brass lamps, carpets, soft furnishings, and other things that came to characterize the hippie look. Back at Redlands, the Acid King, David Schneiderman, provided LSD from his infamous briefcase to the house party goers around midday. By the evening, the party, briefly graced with Beatle George Harrison and wife Patty, was said to be winding down. This congenial atmosphere was rudely interrupted by a banging on the door and 18 police officers, including 2 policewomen, barging their way in. They found a small amount of amphetamine, which Jagger claimed, marijuana and some heroin owned by Robert Groovy Bob Fraser. Jagger was charged with possession of amphetamine and Richards marijuana and allowing criminal activity to occur on his premises. They were bailed and Crown Court date of June was set. The following months saw mass media coverage of the arrest. As a result, the spotlight was placed upon the drug laws and whether they were antiquated and outdated for the new generation's media-manufactured obsession with personal freedom. Many celebrities and socialites and academics came out for the Rolling Stones, and the case galvanized the burgeoning counterculture behind them, granting them martyr status on both sides of the pond, as well as maintaining their image as the bad boys of rock, advertising their bohemian druggy lifestyle and use of drugs such as LSD and marijuana. The months of media focus on the story provided what you could call an advertising push for drugs and bohemianism, just as the Summer of Love was getting underway and the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's was hitting the shops. Now bear in mind that this story was everywhere in the tabloids, radio and late-night discussion shows, at the exact same time that the man presented as Paul McCartney gave his infamous LSD advocating interview, the 17th of July 1967.
So, how often have you taken LSD?
About 4 times.
So there was a lot of energy, a lot of energy into creating the Summer of Love. And as I say, I believe that these events were coordinated. Again, it seems both pillars were working in tandem, pushing the narrative and advocating the same lifestyle to their huge global fan base. The two faced sentencing on the 29th of June 1967. Jagger was given a £200 fine and a 3-month custodial sentence. Richards, whom had not endeared himself to the judge after telling him that he, quote, didn't care for his petty morals, end quote, was given a £500 fine and 1 year incarceration. Jagger was taken to Brixton, Richards to Wormwood Scrubs. Now this is where we get to what I believe is the plain sight smoking gun in the whole saga, which is where Times editor Baron William Rees-Mogg, father of Sir Jacob and supposed pillar of establishment conservatism, wrote an impassioned defence of the pair in his editorial with the famous headline, "Who breaks a butterfly on a wheel?" At this junction, we must explore the symbology used. The monarch mind control system makes use of many images and associations. It gets the name not from the monarchy, as in the royal family, rather the monarch butterfly. The butterfly symbol has a long association with that of a controlled figure. We can see it throughout pop culture and entertainment as an encoded reference for someone who is under the auspices of a handler and working on behalf of an unseen overarching power structure. By describing the Rolling Stones as the butterfly on the wheel, it can be very hard not to deduce revelation of the method as at play. A winking to the collaborators behind the scenes whilst performing an elaborate bit of theatre to masquerade as the game changer that saved the pair from prison. It was Rees-Mogg's impassioned rhetoric that was said to influence the pair's subsequent appeal and release and set about the wheels of judicial relaxation of the drug laws. Both were released, having served only 1 night in prison. It's just pure theatre, the whole thing. The Stones had garnished their bad boy image. The drugs culture had been placed front and square in the public's minds. Endless sequences of TV, radio debates had played out, with urbane sophisticates pleading for civil liberty and a relaxation of the drug law. The conservative false establishment that had seemingly attempted to throw the book at the pair was shown as out of date and in need of review. It's my assessment that this was a form of institutional controlled demolition, a bit of theatre to further divide what was presented as out-of-date morals with the new Age of Aquarius proclaiming generation. The same month as the Stones court case, all 4 Beatles, Jonathan Miller, Frances Huxley, wife of, and a host of other celebrities, left-leaning intellectuals and Tavistock adjacent individuals, paid for and signed a page-long advert in the Times calling for the legalization of marijuana. The advert was the brainchild of Steve Abrams of the organisation SOMA. How's that for plain sight? It seems clear to me that the wording of Rees-Mogg's editorial was no mistake. It was one part of the British deep state winking at the other. The butterfly in this case was the controlled change agents, the Rolling Stones. The article was published to bring the whole charade to an end, which it did. The whole saga had been a cleverly crafted bit of theatre to assist the push into the mainstream of the Tavistockian social engineering project that masqueraded as an organic grassroots counterculture. Fast forward 2 years to 1969, and with the mysterious death of Brian Jones, aged 27, the Rolling Stones played a concert in Hyde Park to his memory. And how did they start the show? By reading a poem by avowed atheist Shelley and then releasing, you guessed it, hundreds of butterflies into the air.